January 1892. A thick, almost tangible fog envelops Windsor, transforming the world into a silent realm of gray shadows. It muffles the mournful tolling of bells and the heavy, rhythmic clatter of hooves on the cobblestones, damp with drizzle. Through the streets, frozen in a silent, respectful stupor, a funeral procession moves slowly. A black river of grief flowing through the frozen city. At its center is a velvet-draped coffin, and within it, the unfulfilled, erased future of the greatest empire on the planet. He was only 28 years old. His name was Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, or to his family, simply Eddie. He was the eldest son of the future king, the beloved grandson of the almighty Queen Victoria, and one day, by right of birth, he was to wear the crown of St. Edward upon his head. But behind the black veils and stone-faced expressions of the grieving royal family hid another feeling, monstrous in its frankness: relief. For decades, a serpentine whisper had slithered through the palace corridors, lined with silk and tapestries, that the prince was not fit for the throne, that he was a mistake of nature, a disgrace to the dynasty. And after his death, this whisper transformed into one of the darkest and most persistent legends in history. The legend that the heir to the throne was, in fact, the world's most famous serial killer, Jack the Ripper. And when he was gone, the family did something inexplicable. They burned all his personal letters, diaries, and notes to ashes. What terrible secret were they so desperately trying to hide in the flames? To understand how the heir to an empire on which the sun never set became the prime suspect in its most notorious and bloody crime, we must return to the very beginning of his short, awkward, and tragic life. He was born as the hope of the nation on January 8, 1864, the firstborn of the Prince and Princess of Wales, the future King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. His arrival was met with cannon salutes in Hyde Park and widespread jubilation that spilled onto the streets of London. He was destined to rule at the absolute peak of Britain's power, in an era when its flag flew on every continent. But from the very first years, it became clear: something was wrong. Something fundamentally, alarmingly wrong. His tutors, with growing desperation, reported to the palace. The boy was abnormally listless, his mind seemingly shrouded in an impenetrable fog. He could not concentrate on his lessons, read almost nothing, and seemed to live in his own separate world, inaccessible to others. While his younger brother George, lively, clever, and energetic, easily mastered sciences and languages, Eddie could sit for hours, staring at a single point with a blank, vacant gaze. His own father, the future King Edward VII, a man of action, a hedonist, and a connoisseur of life in all its manifestations, did not hide his disappointment and even contempt. In moments of frustration, he called his firstborn a dunce and a loafer, whose apathy enraged him. In a desperate, almost panicked attempt to toughen him up, to forge a man and a future monarch out of this apathetic, dreamy youth, he was sent to the Navy. It was the last resort, the last hope. Together with his brother George, he was to undergo the harsh school of naval service aboard the training ship HMS Britannia to learn discipline, responsibility, and courage. But this solution, intended to be a salvation, only exacerbated the problem, opening Pandora's box. Away from the suffocating control of the palace and the eternally displeased gaze of his father, Eddie for the first time tasted true freedom. And this freedom proved to be a deadly poison. Instead of becoming a bastion of discipline, the Army and Navy became for him a gateway to a world of forbidden pleasures, which he had previously only been able to guess at. He discovered endless officers' parties, dubious company in port towns, and the readily available amusements of London's underbelly. The young prince, who was being prepared to rule the world, plunged headlong, recklessly, and greedily into a life full of vice. He spent state money on drink and gambling, made dangerous acquaintances with people whose names were not spoken in polite society, and sank ever deeper into the abyss from which his family tried in vain to pull him out. Every report of his behavior that reached Queen Victoria was a blow to her very heart. Her perfect heir, her hope, was turning into a walking scandal before her eyes, a time bomb that could explode at any moment and destroy everything. And it did explode. The first deafening crack in the impeccable facade of the Victorian monarchy appeared in July 1889. This scandal went down in history as the Cleveland Street affair. The police raided a male brothel in a fashionable London district, secretly frequented by the most influential aristocrats of the kingdom, where they were serviced by young telegraph boys from the post office. During interrogations, under pressure, the name of one of the highest-ranking clients surfaced. A name that made the entire top echelon of power shudder and threw Scotland Yard into a state of shock. Rumors spread through the city and then throughout the country like wildfire. One of the regulars of this den of iniquity was none other than Prince Albert Victor, second in line to the throne. For Victorian England, where homosexuality was considered not just a sin, but a criminal offense, the vice that dare not be named among Christians and was punishable by penal servitude. This was tantamount to social death. For the heir to the throne, the future head of the Church of England, it was an absolute unthinkable catastrophe, capable of destroying the very idea of monarchy. An icy, all-consuming panic gripped the palace. It was necessary to act quickly, decisively, and ruthlessly. Prince Eddie was hastily, almost secretly, sent on a long, official tour of British India, far from dangerous questions, far from the London newspapermen hungry for sensation and blood. Meanwhile, the Crown's best lawyers and government agents worked tirelessly, covering their tracks. Key witnesses, ready to testify, suddenly disappeared, having received generous compensation and a one-way ticket to the colonies. Names in court records were replaced with faceless initials, and unprecedented pressure was put on the press from the very top. The fire was extinguished, but the acrid smell of burning lingered forever. From that moment on, Eddie was no longer just a disappointment to his family. He had become a threat to national security. But this was only a foreshadowing, the first flash of lightning before the real storm. The true, impenetrable darkness had gathered over the prince's name a year earlier, in the dreadful and foggy autumn of 1888. While Eddie was squandering his life in barracks and at questionable parties, in the fetid, poverty-stricken slums of London's East End, in the Whitechapel district, a nightmare began that had no equal. On the filthy streets, barely illuminated by dim gas lamps, an unseen monster began its bloody harvest. Its victims were destitute women, driven to despair and forced to sell themselves to survive. In just 2 months, from August to November, he brutally murdered and mutilated 5 women. His cruelty was inhuman, and the surgical precision with which he removed his victims' internal organs indicated a profound knowledge of anatomy. The killer, who sent mocking, grammatically error-ridden letters to newspapers and the police, signed with a name that still makes the blood run cold: Jack the Ripper. London, the capital of the world, was paralyzed by a primal, animalistic terror. Scotland Yard was run off its feet, questioning hundreds of people and investigating thousands of theories. But the killer was like a phantom, vanishing without a trace into the morning fog. And it was then, in this boiling cauldron of fear, panic, and speculation, that Prince Eddie's name was first mentioned. At first, it was a barely audible whisper in pubs and at markets. A rumor passed from mouth to mouth. Then came hints in the tabloid press about a high-ranking criminal being covered up by the authorities to avoid a scandal that would make the Cleveland Street affair seem like child's play. How was this possible? How could the heir to the throne, a man whose life was scheduled to the minute and who was constantly under surveillance, be connected to the most gruesome crimes of the era? But for the public, already aware of the prince's scandalous behavior and questionable inclinations, this idea did not seem so insane. Several theories emerged, each more fantastical than the last. But every one of them, like a compass needle, pointed to the prince's dark side. The first, and most popular theory, was horrifying in its tragic simplicity. It claimed that Prince Eddie, known for his promiscuous liaisons in London's demi-monde, had contracted syphilis during his escapades. In those days, the disease was incurable, and in its later stages, led to progressive paralysis and madness, known as neurosyphilis. According to this version, the disease slowly but surely destroyed his brain. In fits of uncontrollable rage, paranoia, and sadism, he would supposedly secretly leave the palace, change into simple clothes, and venture into the labyrinths of Whitechapel, venting his pain and hatred on the most defenseless. He killed because his mind was poisoned, and the royal family, aware of his progressive madness, did everything to conceal this terrible truth and avoid a disgrace unprecedented in history. The second theory was even more complex and cinematic, turning the story into a true Shakespearean tragedy of forbidden love and state cruelty. According to this version, the weak-willed and romantic Prince Eddie, in secret from everyone, did not just have an affair, but married a Catholic commoner, a shopgirl from a tobacco shop named Annie Crook. They even had a child, a girl. For the monarchy, whose head is also the head of the Anglican Church, such a marriage to a Catholic was an absolute taboo. It would have been tantamount to high treason, a dynastic crisis capable of toppling the throne and plunging the country into chaos. The women murdered in Whitechapel, according to this version, were friends of the prince's secret wife. They were privy to his secret and decided to blackmail the royal family, demanding a huge sum of money for their silence. And then, to silence them forever, the ruthless state machine stepped in. By a secret order from above, perhaps from the Prime Minister himself, Queen Victoria's personal physician, Sir William Gull, and his coachman allegedly committed these ritualistic, demonstratively brutal murders. The goal was not only to eliminate the blackmailers, but also to disguise a political assassination as the work of a madman, frightening away anyone who might even think of threatening the crown. In this version, Prince Eddie was not the killer, but the root cause of the murders. His forbidden love and fatal weakness of character became the trigger for a machine of violence that would stop at nothing to protect the stability of the throne. Whoever he was in these legends, a crazed maniac or a weak-willed lover, the Ripper's shadow stuck to his name for good, becoming his second, unofficial title. Of course, modern historians and criminologists, having gained access to the archives, have torn these theories to shreds. Diaries of courtiers, official records from the court circular, and personal letters were found, confirming that on the days of most of the Ripper's murders, Prince Albert Victor was hundreds of miles away from London. He was staying at his Scottish estate, Balmoral, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, including members of the royal family and servants. He had an ironclad, irrefutable alibi. But facts are powerless against a good story, especially one so horrifying and seductive. The legend was already born and had begun to live its own life, separate from reality. To the public, the slow-witted prince, prone to vice and scandal, was the perfect candidate for the role of a monster in human form. He became a symbol of the deep decay of the aristocracy, of its secret sins hidden behind the gilded facades of palaces. An alibi could have saved him in a court of law, but it was powerless in the court of public opinion. The stigma remained for the rest of his short life and posthumous reputation. In the eyes of many, he remained the Prince of Darkness, the heir who turned into a monster by night and wore a mask of aristocratic boredom by day. The royal family found itself in a terrifying, inescapable trap. Their future king was either an idiot incapable of stringing two words together, a debauchee whose name was associated with the filthiest scandals, or, in the most terrible, albeit fictional version, a serial killer. Any of these images was fatal to the prestige of the monarchy in an era of strict morality. They desperately sought a way out of this impasse, and fate, as if hearing their silent prayers, granted them one, cruel but final. The winter of 1891-92 was harsh and deadly. Across Europe, a pandemic of the Russian flu, as the influenza virus was called at the time, raged relentlessly. The disease claimed thousands of lives, sparing neither poor nor rich, neither peasants nor kings. It was in the midst of this epidemic that Prince Eddie, who was staying at the Sandringham estate to celebrate his 28th birthday, began to feel unwell. At first, it seemed like an ordinary cold, nothing to worry about, especially given the prince's chronically fragile health. But his condition worsened with every passing hour. The illness rapidly escalated into a severe double pneumonia. The empire's best physicians were summoned to Sandringham. They fought for his life using every means available to them, but it was all in vain. Within days, in agony and delirium, the heir to the British throne died. His death, sudden and, to many, suspiciously convenient, instantly changed the course of British and world history. The throne would now pass to his younger brother George, the complete mirror opposite of Eddie. George was serious, responsible, even a little dull, a devoted family man and a former naval officer with an impeccable reputation. He was exactly the kind of stable and predictable monarch the empire needed after the series of scandals surrounding his brother. He became King George V, a respected and beloved ruler who led the country with dignity through the horrors of the First World War and laid the foundations of the modern House of Windsor. And Eddie was erased. His name was mentioned as rarely as possible, reduced to an unfortunate and embarrassing footnote in the margins of grand history. But the most cynical and revealing act in this entire drama was the fate of his fiancée. Shortly before his death, Eddie had become engaged to Princess Mary of Teck, a smart and strong-willed woman destined to be queen by his side. After his passing, she did not remain in mourning for long. Dynasties do not tolerate a vacuum, and political alliances outweigh personal feelings. She was simply transferred to the younger brother, like a valuable dynastic asset that could not be wasted. She married George and became Queen Mary, one of the most influential and revered women in British history. This cold, pragmatic move exposed what Eddie truly was to his family. Not a beloved son or brother, but a defective component in the machinery of the state. replaced with visible relief by a functioning one. And immediately after the funeral, when the soil on his grave in Windsor had not yet cooled, his family carried out the act that forever shrouded his name in impenetrable mystery and fueled decades of conspiracy theories. By order from above, presumably from his father, the Prince of Wales, all of the deceased prince's personal documents were collected. His diaries, which he had kept since youth, his notebooks, all his private correspondence over many years. And all of it was mercilessly thrown into the large fireplace at Marlborough House, his parents' London residence. They stood silently and watched as the fire devoured his life, his thoughts, his secrets, his soul, turning paper and ink into a handful of drifting ash. So what were they hiding? What was in those letters that the royal family so hastily and irrevocably destroyed, leaving not a single scrap behind? Were they irrefutable proof of his visits to the brothel on Cleveland Street, which could have confirmed the scandal they had so diligently hushed up? Or perhaps they held love letters to that very commoner Catholic, proof of a secret marriage and an illegitimate child capable of plunging the dynasty into chaos. Or maybe there was something worse. Incoherent, mad notes, sketches of nightmares he brought to life on the dark, rain-soaked streets of Whitechapel. We will never know the truth. The fire consumed it forever, leaving behind only a scorched field for speculation. But the very fact of this total incineration speaks volumes. The royal family feared not so much a specific crime as the very personality of Eddie, his essence. They feared his instability, his depravity, his fatal inability to live up to his great destiny. They were not burning evidence against Jack the Ripper. They were burning proof that their heir was a catastrophic mistake of nature, a man who, by his very existence on the throne, could destroy a 1,000-year-old monarchy. The legend of the Ripper was merely the ugliest and most grotesque embodiment of this deep, existential fear. Prince Albert Victor has remained in history as the king who never was. His legacy is a void, a gaping hole in the line of succession, an eternal what if. He became a ghost, a dark shadow on the Windsor family tree, hastily erased so that the light of a new, proper king could ascend in its place. His death, however tragic for him personally, was a salvation for the institution he was meant to serve, but for which he proved to be utterly and tragically unfit. He is an eternal reminder of how crushing the price of birth can be, how merciless fate can be when it places a burden on a man's fragile shoulders that he is unable to bear. History is written by the victors, and in this story, his brother, order, and the reputation of the crown were victorious. And Prince Eddie remains forever in the thick fog of Victorian London, either an unfortunate victim of circumstance and his own weakness, or a monster whose darkest secret his family took to their graves, leaving us with only a blood-curdling legend.